So if I asked you, if there was one person at East with the flu, would that be a story idea? No, no. I think you got that one figured out. Two, five, 10, 15. Now, if we said COVID, yeah, probably now, but you've added prominence to that. But if I just said the flu, hmm, probably not, right? 10, 15. What's your magic number? The question here is a question of impact. How many people are impacted and how much are they impacted? That's your question that you would answer with story ideas, um, as far as whether this is a big enough story or not. And that applies here. It's kind of funny looking back. I did this show again, probably back in February. And so we were starting to see the start of it. And here you see that what they had deaths past 1,000 at that point. And so that was a story, right? That was a story then. Global deaths were at 1,000. So obviously an impact nationally, but who knew at that point that it would become a million? So you really start to see the severity of the impact here with COVID. You get to see the seriousness in terms of like the sheer volume and numbers. I mean, you see that and you see it with coronavirus has killed more than 1 million people worldwide. The CBS Sunday Morning tweet, all that's example of how impact um, factors into stories. Most of the time you don't hear when there's just one wildfire that pops up in Colorado or California. However, you throw the sheer volume of it, okay, the fire has tripled in size since it began Sunday, burning 36,000 acres, okay? So there you go. That tells you right there that these became a bigger and bigger story, and it impacted thousands of people at this point, and so it became this major national story. And so that's where you figure an impact. Anytime one of these hurricanes, I mean, this is an older hurricane back last year in September, but you've got another one coming in the Gulf. I mean, those are potentially damage thousands of homes and move out thousands of people. So the sheer, rather than just a normal storm that you wouldn't hear about, but anytime a hurricane comes in, it's so major. And Katrina that came through, it did so much damage and it displaced so many people that even living in the area now. So you get the sense of what impact looks like. Some of those odd stories, this one was one that broke, again, probably a year ago, September, and it was the boat that had all these people on it that were asleep and were killed. So you had 34 people killed in that one boat fire. And so those kinds of stories, end up making national news. And so it's all about impact. Anytime these national organized these national marches, this is back in the Women's March, but you got the Black Lives Matter marches. Those have been so huge and so sort of nationwide, and in some cases worldwide. And so that the sheer volume of those, um, you know, makes it a story. For a while, sexual assault was a story in schools. Um, and this goes back a few years in when hazing became a story for freshman runners. And you may or may not, you probably are just now too young, maybe these groups, maybe too young to remember this. But anyway, there was a bunch of them that were hazed. It also became a big local story. Again, this has got proximity because it's right here next to us, right? And that's the reason here the Shawnee Mission Post covered it. But it also has to do with the size. There were so many freshmen on that team. Those cross country teams probably aren't now what they used to be, but oh my gosh, they were 180 something kids. And so if you talk about the freshman group, that was probably 40 or 50 or more kids involved. So again, the sheer numbers at that point work in it. And health stories like this, how to burn off belly fat. I mean, this is kinds of health issues that lots of people involved with. So impact can happen in numbers of ways. It's like how much it's impacted people, like the wildfires that displace and destroy property, and it's also the sheer volume of numbers of people that are involved in impact. And so the second of these to look for is audience. That is, does your story deal with the topics that your reader is interested in? And here's where we start sort of narrowing down the story ideas for the high school reader. You have to sort of think about sort of topics that your high school reader is interested in. And this doesn't mean every single high school kid, but this just means what are groups of people oriented? What are they interested in? You would start, if I started you, and I usually would do this in class where I'd say, what sort of thing, try to go around the room and everybody come up with a topic. We'd start with sports or whatever, but then it gets down to like grades and, um, uh, uh, you know, drugs or Netflix. And we just start coming up with these topics that potentially you could sort of use to think about like where the stories could come from. And so that's kind of the idea. I mean, this was one was like sales of bulletproof backpacks. After all those shootings that happened in schools and in the areas, then that became sort of a national issue. And certainly these bulletproof backpacks that they were selling, you can see the relationship to why high school students might pay attention to that. You may remember this one. This is a woman sentenced to 15 months in texting suicide. So basically, she encouraged this guy, this boy, to commit suicide. And so you saw these texts or whatever that were, just you're not going to do it, and just kind of just goading him on to sort of commit suicide, and he did. And then this woman faced jail time over that. So that again deals with texting, deals with suicide, both high level sort of student relevant topics, but something like this, party buses. I mean, I get it. Teens, like you got all sorts of kids here at East that will, if it weren't for COVID-19, would get these party buses. And then, a few years back, I mean, people fell off of them and they were hurting them. And so then this became sort of a local story, but a kind of a localization of that to the Harbinger. And these are stories that may go on in the area that suddenly we would pick up and localize. You've grown up in kind of an Uber or, Postmate world or whatever. Most of you have sort of used Uber probably when you're in junior high. I mean, I always thought that was a story. I'm not sure we did it at the high school level, but it certainly was something for freshmen and junior high kids would use. Oftentimes they would use Uber in this area to get around. And again, this is one of those stories that doesn't necessarily apply to, like every class. I mean, freshmen aren't really starting to think about, colleges, neither are sophomores, but it's pretty much every senior's world right now. So sometimes you can find stories relevant to college applications. I mean, I consider and spin off all sorts of things where, they're changing the application process up because the SATs and the limits on some of the standardized testing. Some of these colleges are changing them up where they're going to mostly to grades or to what kids are involved in. So you can just start to think about some of the some of the spin-offs of that that are going on. But anything college right now, you'd find an instant sort of readership of probably among like 85% of the senior audience, and really some juniors as well who are starting to think about it. This is an old one, but I love it because it's like, video gaming sports scholarships, and it's like, yeah, you got video gaming. So not all of your audience should have to prepare and want to read the story, but if you've got a decent sized group, it's relevant to cover. I throw this one in there. I keep this in here. It's another one. It's like 80% of 10-year-old American girls have been on a diet. I really wasn't sure if that was the case at that point, but dieting, and then the fact that they were so young, I mean, health and weight, all sort of topics that you'll get a lot of girls and boys, in terms of readership. So, and this is one on fantasy football. That's another topic that you get a lot of kids involved in. They were actually thinking about a law at that point to make it illegal to play fantasy because it's a gambling situation. That was a few years back. The myth of rampant teenage promiscuity. So here you're talking about sexual activity. Those are, again, teenage promiscuity. That's all part of, these are topics that your reader cares about. Tanning beds. I mean, I could just sort of rip off the different ones. I love this when parents and teenagers meet on Facebook. Probably most of you don't have a Facebook, but anything that revolves around Instagram, probably sometimes Snapchat, those kinds of stories, the fact they were banning TikTok at one point, those are stories that we end up sort of trying to find localizations to, find our own voices among students. And so those are just topics that your reader might think about. So there you go. That's your kind of order. Your task here is to go out and find something with impact, and something that relates to a student audience. So go out and find a story. It doesn't have to be timely, it doesn't have to be any of those things, but it needs to have sort of impact. So a large number of people, or a topic that's of real importance, or something, the amount of impact that goes on, and it needs to relate to teen audiences. So there you go. That's your task.